The stars had never seemed so cold as they did on that winter morning when the alien ships first appeared above Earth. And Admiral Helena Vance stood at the window of the United Terran Council chamber, watching the massive vessels hover like dark mountains against the pale blue sky. She had seen many things in her 60 years of life, and she had fought in wars that nearly destroyed humanity's fragile colonies among the stars. But nothing had prepared her for this moment when an empire older than human civilization itself came knocking at their door with demands that no free people could ever accept. Ambassador Kelveth of the Vareth Dominion stood in the center of the chamber, his tall gray form towering over the human delegates who sat in stunned silence around the curved table. His four eyes swept across the room with the casual arrogance of a being who had never known defeat, and his voice carried the weight of absolute certainty when he spoke. "Your species has expanded beyond its proper boundaries," he declared, his translator device turning his harsh clicking language into smooth human words. "And the Dominion has decided that 3 of your outer colonies now fall within our sphere of influence. You will surrender these worlds within 30 solar cycles, or we will take them by force and integrate your entire species into the Dominion as servants." A murmur of shock rippled through the chamber, and several delegates rose to their feet with angry protests on their lips. But Admiral Vance remained still and silent by the window. She had studied the Vareth for decades, and she knew that anger would only amuse them. The Vareth Dominion had conquered over 400 species across 10,000 years of expansion. They controlled vast regions of the galaxy, with fleets that numbered in the tens of thousands, and they had never lost a war against any civilization they had encountered. To them, humanity was nothing more than a minor inconvenience, a young species that had barely learned to walk among the stars. Chancellor David Okonkwo, the leader of the United Terran Council, rose slowly from his seat at the head of the table. He was an old man with white hair and tired eyes, but his voice remained steady when he addressed the alien ambassador. "You ask us to surrender billions of our people to slavery," he said quietly, "and you expect us to simply agree because you have more ships than we do. I wonder if you truly understand what you are demanding." Kelveth made a sound that the translator rendered as laughter, though there was no warmth in it. "We understand perfectly, Chancellor. We have made this same offer to hundreds of species before yours, and they have all learned that resistance only brings greater suffering. The strong rule and the weak serve. This is the natural order of all things." Admiral Vance finally turned from the window and walked slowly toward the center of the chamber. Every eye in the room followed her movement, and even Kelveth seemed to pause as this scarred human woman approached him without fear. "I have a question for you, Ambassador," she said in a calm and measured tone, "and I would appreciate an honest answer. In all your thousands of years of conquest, has any species ever warned you to stay away and then made you regret ignoring that warning?" The Vareth ambassador tilted his head in what might have been confusion or amusement. "No species has ever been foolish enough to threaten the Dominion, Admiral. Those who resist are crushed, and those who submit are spared the worst of our attention. This is how it has always been." Vance nodded slowly as if she had expected exactly this answer. "Then let me give you something new to consider," she said, and her voice grew harder with each word, "because humanity is about to become the first species to draw a line that you cannot cross." She turned to face the council, and when she spoke again, her words carried across the chamber like thunder. "I propose that we send a message to the Vareth Dominion and to every other civilization in this galaxy. A message that makes our position absolutely clear. We will not surrender, we will not submit, and we will not be conquered." Chancellor Okonkwo studied her face for a long moment before he spoke. "What exactly do you have in mind, Admiral?" Vance pulled a small device from her pocket and placed it on the table. A holographic display flickered to life, showing a map of human space with a bright red line marking its borders. We broadcast a warning on every frequency, she explained. A simple statement that leaves no room for misunderstanding. Any Varith warship that crosses into our territory will be met with total force. This will be Earth's final warning, and if they ignore it, they will face the consequences. Kelveth made that cold laughing sound again. You have perhaps 200 warships in your entire fleet, Admiral. The Dominion commands 15,000 vessels of war. What consequences could you possibly deliver against such overwhelming force? Vance turned back to face him, and something in her eyes made the ancient alien pause for just a moment. That is not your concern, Ambassador. Your only concern should be making sure your Emperor understands that we are not bluffing. Cross the line and face the consequences. That is our message. The Council voted within the hour, and the decision was unanimous. Humanity would not surrender a single world, a single colony, or a single citizen to the Varith Dominion. The warning went out across all frequencies, broadcast in 1,000 languages to every corner of the galaxy. Ships received it, stations recorded it, and countless alien species heard for the first time the voice of a young civilization that refused to kneel. Kelveth returned to his ship with contempt written across his gray features. They are prey making noise before the hunt, he reported to his superiors, and they will learn their place soon enough. But deep beneath the Antarctic ice, in a facility that existed on no official record, Admiral Vance stood in a massive underground chamber and watched as technicians ran final checks on systems that had been building in secret for 80 years. Project Prometheus is ready for activation, reported the facility commander, a young woman with nervous eyes. But Admiral, are you certain we want to reveal what we have built? Once we use these weapons, the galaxy will never look at humanity the same way again. Vance placed her hand on the cold metal railing and stared at the rows of ships that stretched into the darkness beyond the lights. That is exactly the point, she said quietly. And when the Varith cross our line, they will discover that humanity has been preparing for this moment since the day we first learned we were not alone in the universe. The warning had been sent, and now all that remained was to wait and see if the ancient empire would be wise enough to heed it. But Admiral Vance already knew the answer because she had studied the Varith, and she understood that they had never learned to fear. That was about to change. The Varith First Fleet crossed into human space with the confidence of predators who had never known fear, and War Master Threnvok stood on the bridge of his flagship watching the stars blur past as 800 warships raced toward their target. How long until we reach the human colony? He demanded, his 4 eyes fixed on the tactical display that showed their route to Kepler 442. 14 hours at current speed, War Master, reported his navigation officer, and we have detected no significant resistance along our approach vector. Threnvok made a sound of satisfaction. This was exactly what he had expected from a species too young and too weak to stand against the might of the Dominion. They would flee before his fleet like insects scattering from a flame. But Captain Yuki Tanaka had no intention of fleeing. Her small patrol group of 12 ships fell back before the advancing Varith armada. But they did not run. Instead, they maintained a constant distance from the enemy fleet while broadcasting a single message on repeat across all frequencies. You have crossed the line, the message declared, and the consequences are coming. Threnvok found this amusing. Look at them, he told his officers with contempt, and see how they repeat their foolish warning even as they retreat. Do they truly believe that words will stop our advance? His communications officer tilted her head in confusion. War Master, the humans are not fleeing toward their colonies. They appear to be leading us toward a specific location in deep space. It does not matter where they lead us. Threnvok replied with absolute certainty, because we will crush them regardless of their position. Continue the advance and prepare all weapons for combat. On Earth, Admiral Helena Vance stood in the command center of Prometheus Base, surrounded by screens that showed the positions of every human ship and every Varith vessel in real time. Her hands were steady despite the weight of the moment, and her voice was calm when she gave her orders. Activate all hidden platforms in Sectors 7 through 12, she commanded, and signal the reserve fleets to begin their approach. We will catch them in a sphere formation with no avenue of escape. Her tactical officer looked up with wonder in his eyes. Admiral, the Varith have no idea what they are flying into. Their sensors cannot detect our stealth ships at this range. That was always the plan, Vance replied quietly. And for 80 years, we have been building and hiding and waiting for this exact moment. We knew that someday an enemy would come who would not listen to reason. And we prepared accordingly. The hidden shipyards that had been constructed in asteroid fields and gas giant moons began to open their massive doors, and ships emerged from the darkness like ghosts rising from their graves. These were not the 200 patrol vessels that the Varith had counted in their intelligence reports. These were purpose-built warships designed for one thing and one thing only: the destruction of any force that threatened human survival. Project Prometheus had been humanity's darkest secret for 8 decades, funded through hidden budgets and constructed by workers who took their knowledge to their graves. Entire generations had worked in silence to build the fleet that now emerged from hiding. 2,000 warships moved through space toward the approaching Varith Armada, their weapons charged and their crews ready for battle. And on board each ship, the same words echoed through the corridors. You were warned! War Master Threnvok was reviewing battle plans in his command chamber when his sensor officer burst through the door with panic written across his gray features. War Master, we are detecting massive energy signatures appearing throughout the surrounding space. There are ships emerging from locations where our sensors showed nothing but empty void. Threnvok rushed to the bridge and stared at the tactical display with growing disbelief. Red icons were appearing everywhere, surrounding his fleet in a perfect sphere of destruction. The numbers climbed higher with each passing second until the display showed over 2,000 enemy contacts. This is impossible, he growled, because our intelligence reported that the humans had only 200 ships. Where did all of these vessels come from? His communications officer turned with fear in her eyes. War Master, we are receiving a transmission from the human fleet. They are broadcasting a message to all of our ships. Put it through, Threnvok commanded, and a moment later the face of Admiral Helena Vance appeared on every screen in the Varith fleet. She looked tired. Threnvok noticed. Tired and sad and somehow older than her years should have made her. But her voice was steady and her eyes were hard when she spoke. War Master Threnvok, she began, your fleet has crossed into sovereign human territory despite our warning. You have 60 seconds to order your ships to power down their weapons and surrender. This is your only offer of mercy, and I strongly suggest you take it. Threnvok felt rage burning in his chest at the audacity of this human female. No species had ever dared to demand surrender from a Varith fleet, and he would not be the first commander in 10,000 years to yield to such an insult. Human, he snarled into the communication system. You may have hidden some ships from our sensors, but you are still outnumbered in experience and technology. The Dominion has conquered hundreds of species, and we have never lost a battle. Your hidden fleet changes nothing. Admiral Vance shook her head slowly, and something like pity crossed her face. We gave you a chance, she said softly, and we warned you what would happen if you ignored us. Remember that in the hours to come, War Master. Remember that we tried to show you mercy. The transmission ended, and for a moment there was silence on the bridge of the Varith flagship. Then Threnvok raised his fist and roared his command. All ships engage the enemy. Show these humans what it means to challenge the Dominion. The Vareth fleet opened fire, and the battle for humanity's future began. Captain Tanaka watched from the bridge of the Defiance as the two fleets collided in a storm of energy weapons and explosions. "Here we go," she said quietly to her crew, "and may we prove worthy of those who built the weapons we carry." The human ships responded to the Vareth attack with devastating precision. And within minutes it became clear that this battle would not go the way the ancient empire had expected. Admiral Vance watched the tactical display with grim satisfaction. The warning had been ignored, and now the consequences would be delivered. 3 months passed since humanity sent its warning to the stars, and in that time, the galaxy watched with curious eyes to see what would happen next. Some species hoped the young humans would survive, while others simply waited for the inevitable destruction that always followed when lesser civilizations defied the Vareth Dominion. On the Vareth homeworld, a planet of dark stone and red skies that had ruled an empire for 10,000 years, the High Command gathered in their ancient war chamber to decide humanity's fate. War Master Threnvok stood before the assembled generals and admirals, his massive form casting a long shadow across the polished floor. He was the greatest military commander the Dominion had produced in 5 centuries, and he had personally overseen the conquest of 37 species during his long career. "These humans are soft creatures," he declared with contempt dripping from every word, "and they achieved spaceflight barely a heartbeat ago in the span of galactic history. Their warning is nothing but noise, the squealing of prey animals who do not yet understand their place in the natural order." The Emperor of the Vareth sat upon his throne at the far end of the chamber, ancient beyond measure and patient as stone. He had ruled for 2,000 years, and he had heard similar speeches before countless conquests. "What do you propose, War Master?" the Emperor asked in a voice like grinding gravel. Threnvok turned and gestured to a holographic display that showed the border between Vareth space and human territory. "I propose a show of force, my Emperor. We will send a fleet to their border and let them see what true power looks like. When they witness our ships darkening their skies, their courage will fail them and they will beg for mercy." The Emperor considered this for a long moment before nodding his ancient head. "Very well, but you will not attack until I give the order. I wish to see how these humans respond to pressure." On Earth, the tension was nearly unbearable as news spread that Vareth ships were massing near the border. Protests erupted in cities across the planet, with millions of people demanding that the Council surrender to save humanity from extinction. "We cannot win this war," shouted one protest leader to the crowds gathered in the streets of New Geneva, "and our government is leading us to our deaths with their foolish pride." But in the quiet corridors of power, different conversations were taking place. Dr. Marcus Chen was a xenolinguist who had spent 40 years studying the Vareth language and culture. He had translated their literature, analyzed their military doctrine, and decoded their historical records with painstaking care. And now he sat in Admiral Vance's private office with a discovery that changed everything. "They have never fought a defensive war," he explained, spreading documents across her desk with trembling hands. "Not once in 10,000 years of conquest. Every battle they have ever won was an attack against a weaker opponent. They do not know how to respond when the enemy refuses to flee." Vance studied the documents with narrowed eyes. "You are saying they have no experience with an enemy who stands and fights?" "More than that," Chung continued with growing excitement. "Their entire military doctrine is built around overwhelming force and psychological intimidation. They expect their enemies to break before the battle even begins. But if someone stands firm, if someone absorbs their first strike and hits back harder, they have no plan for what comes next." This information spread through the highest levels of Earth's military command. And for the first time since the crisis began, There was something like hope in the eyes of those who knew the truth about Project Prometheus. Meanwhile, at the border of human space, Captain Yuki Tanaka commanded the patrol ship TSS Defiance. She was a small woman with sharp eyes and a reputation for staying calm under pressure. And she needed every bit of that calm as she watched 300 Varith warships take position just outside the Soul Boundary. "They are testing us," she told her crew as they gathered on the bridge, "and they want to see if we will flinch. But we will not give them that satisfaction." The Varith began their psychological campaign with small incursions, sending scout ships that would drift across the border and then retreat before human ships could respond. Each time this happened, Tanaka ordered her patrol to intercept but not to fire. "Hold your positions and broadcast a warning," she commanded, "but do not engage unless they attack first." The Varith interpreted this restraint as cowardice, and their messages grew more taunting with each passing day. They broadcast images of conquered worlds and enslaved species, promising that humanity would soon join the ranks of the defeated. War Master Threnvok watched these exchanges from his flagship with growing contempt. "You see how they cower," he told his officers, "and they respond to our provocations with words instead of weapons. This species has no stomach for war." He sent a message to the Emperor requesting authorization for a full invasion. "The humans are weak and frightened," he reported, "and if we strike now, they will collapse within days. Give me the order, and I will deliver their worlds to you as tribute." The Emperor, old and cunning, sensed an opportunity to expand his empire with minimal effort. "Very well, War Master. You have authorization to proceed. Take the first fleet and show these humans the price of defiance." Threnvok received the message with savage joy. He had conquered dozens of species and had never known defeat, and he saw no reason why these soft pink creatures should be any different. He gathered his officers on the bridge of his flagship and gave them their orders. "We will strike at their agricultural world first, the one they call Kepler 442. 4 billion humans live there, growing food for their other colonies. When we burn their fields and enslave their farmers, the rest of their species will understand that resistance is futile." The first fleet began to move. 800 warships arranged in perfect formation as they approached the line that humanity had drawn in the stars. On the Defiance, Captain Tanaka watched her sensors with a cold feeling in her stomach. "They are coming," she reported to Earth Command, "and they are coming in force." Admiral Vance received the message in her office and closed her eyes for just a moment. She had hoped this day would never come, but she had prepared for it all the same. "May God forgive us for what we are about to do," she whispered. And then she opened a secure channel to the Prometheus facility and spoke the words that would change the galaxy forever. "All assets to full deployment. Show them what humanity has been hiding. Show them the consequences." Deep in space, hidden shipyards opened their doors, and ghost fleets that existed only in whispered rumors emerged from the darkness. The Varith had crossed the line, and now they would learn why humanity had been so confident in its warning. The Battle of the Soul Boundary would be remembered for 10,000 years as the moment when the galaxy learned to respect humanity. And it began with fire and thunder as two fleets clashed in the darkness between the stars. War Master Threnvok had expected the human ships to scatter before his superior firepower, but instead they held their formations and fought with a cold fury that he had never encountered in all his centuries of conquest. "What is wrong with their shields?" screamed his weapons officer as another volley of Varith plasma cannons splashed harmlessly against a human cruiser. "Our weapons are barely scratching their armor." Threnvok stared at the battle display with growing horror as he watched his ships explode one after another. The human weapons were unlike anything in the Varith arsenal, firing beams of focused energy that seemed to pass through shields as if they did not exist. "Those are directed particle weapons," gasped his science officer. and they are tuned to frequencies that our shields cannot block. How did these primitives develop such technology? The answer was simple, though Threnvok would never learn it. Humanity had spent 80 years studying every piece of Vareth technology they could find, analyzing captured equipment and intercepted communications, searching for weaknesses that could be exploited. They had found many weaknesses, and they had built weapons specifically designed to exploit every single one. Captain Yuki Tanaka led her strike wing directly into the heart of the Vareth formation, weaving between enemy ships with a skill born from years of training and simulation. Focus fire on their command vessels, she ordered her pilots, and take out their coordination before they can regroup. The human pilots flew with desperate courage, knowing that the fate of billions rested on their shoulders. They had trained for this moment since childhood, prepared by instructors who understood that someday humanity would face a test that would determine its survival. Vareth ships began to turn against each other as human electronic warfare systems infiltrated their communication networks, broadcasting false orders and corrupting targeting data. Ships that had fought together for centuries suddenly found themselves firing on their own allies. "Our communications are compromised," reported the Vareth flagship's technical officer with panic in his voice, "and I cannot determine which orders are genuine and which are human deceptions." Threnvok watched his proud fleet dissolve into chaos, and for the first time in his long life, he felt the cold touch of fear. The humans were not fighting like any enemy he had ever faced. There was no glory-seeking, no honor duels between champions, no dramatic gestures or proud declarations. They fought with mechanical efficiency, targeting weak points and exploiting vulnerabilities with the cold precision of surgeons removing a tumor. Admiral Vance observed the battle from her command center on Earth, her face illuminated by the glow of tactical displays that showed the destruction of the Vareth fleet in real time. "Maintain pressure on their flanks," she ordered through the communication system, "but leave a corridor open toward their home space. I want survivors to escape and carry the message back to their emperor." Her tactical officer looked up with surprise. "Admiral, we have them surrounded. We could destroy their entire fleet if we press the attack." Vance shook her head slowly. "Total destruction is not our goal, Commander. We want the Vareth to fear us, and fear requires witnesses. If we kill them all, who will tell the Emperor what happened here?" The battle raged for 3 hours, and in that time the Vareth First Fleet was systematically dismantled by human forces. 800 warships had crossed the border with dreams of conquest, and by the time the guns fell silent, only 23 remained. These survivors limped toward the escape corridor with their weapons destroyed and their engines barely functional, spared deliberately so they could carry news of the defeat back to their masters. Captain Tanaka's strike wing converged on the Vareth flagship, disabling its engines and weapons with surgical precision. "War Master Threnvok," she broadcast to the crippled vessel, "your ship is disabled and your fleet is destroyed. You will power down all remaining systems and prepare to be boarded." Threnvok stood in the ruins of his bridge, surrounded by the bodies of his officers and the wreckage of his command. Blood from a wound on his forehead dripped into his eyes, and his legs trembled with exhaustion and shock. He had never known defeat, and the taste of it was bitter beyond anything he had imagined. Human Marines boarded the flagship within the hour, moving through the corridors with weapons raised and faces hidden behind sealed helmets. They were efficient and professional, securing prisoners without unnecessary cruelty, but also without hesitation. Threnvok was dragged from his bridge and brought to a holding cell, where a holographic display flickered to life, showing the face of Admiral Helena Vance. She looked even more tired than before, and there was no triumph in her eyes. Only a deep and terrible weariness that spoke of someone who had done something necessary but painful. "War Master," she said quietly, "I want you to understand something before we send you home. We did not want this war, and we tried everything in our power to avoid it. We warned you. We pleaded with you. We gave you every opportunity to turn back." Threnvok stared at her with hatred burning in his 4 eyes. "You have destroyed the greatest fleet in the galaxy," he snarled. "And you expect me to believe you did not want war?" Vance nodded slowly. "I expect you to remember that we gave you a choice, and you chose to ignore our warning. Now go home, War Master. Go home and tell your Emperor what happened here. Tell him that this was mercy, because we could have killed every single one of you." She leaned closer to the camera, and her voice dropped to barely above a whisper. "Tell him that if another Varys ship ever crosses our border, there will be no survivors left to tell the story. Tell him that Earth has drawn a line, and the consequences for crossing it are final. The surviving Varys ships were repaired just enough to make the journey home, and then they were released to limp back across the border with their tales of horror and defeat." Threnvok stood at the viewport of his crippled flagship and watched the human fleet recede into the distance. He had conquered 37 species in his career, and he had never imagined that his greatest defeat would come from creatures who had barely learned to walk among the stars. But now he understood something that his people had never grasped. The humans were not weak, and they were not soft, and they were not prey. They were something far more dangerous. A species that hoped for peace but prepared for war. A civilization that offered mercy but delivered devastation when that mercy was rejected. The warning had been real, and the consequences had been delivered, and the galaxy would never be the same. 6 months had passed since the Battle of the Soul Boundary, and the galaxy had been transformed in ways that no one could have predicted. The Varith Dominion, which had ruled unchallenged for 10,000 years, now faced rebellion on dozens of worlds as vassal species who had watched a young civilization defeat an entire fleet suddenly found the courage to demand their freedom. War Master Threnvok had delivered his report to the Emperor in the Great Throne Room, speaking of human weapons that bypass shields and electronic warfare systems that turned Varys ships against each other. But more than the technical details, he had spoken of something else, something that had shaken him to his core. They did not fight for glory, he had told the ancient emperor, and they did not seek honor or conquest. They fought to survive, and they were willing to do absolutely anything to protect their people. I have never seen such determination in any species we have conquered. The Emperor had listened in silence, his ancient face unreadable. And then he had done something unprecedented in the history of the Dominion. He had sent Ambassador Kelveth back to Earth, not with demands or threats, but with an offer of peace. The ambassador, who had once stood before the United Terran Council with such arrogance, now entered the same chamber with his head bowed and his voice humble. The Dominion recognizes the sovereignty of human space, he announced to the assembled delegates, and we wish to negotiate terms for lasting peace between our peoples. Dr. Marcus Chen served as humanity's chief negotiator, and he approached the task with the same careful attention to detail that had helped him uncover the weaknesses in Varith military doctrine. "Our terms are simple," he told Kelveth during their first meeting, "and they are not negotiable. The Dominion will recognize human borders and never again threaten our worlds. Additionally, any vassal species that wishes for freedom will be allowed to leave the Dominion without interference." Kelveth's 4 eyes widened with shock. "You are asking us to release species that have served us for thousands of years. The Emperor will never agree to such terms." Chen smiled quietly and leaned forward in his chair. "Then perhaps you should remind the Emperor that we still have the fleet that destroyed War Master Threnvok, and we have been building more ships every day since the battle. The next time we meet in combat, there will be no survivors left to negotiate." The negotiations lasted for 3 weeks, and in the end the Varith agreed to every human demand. They had no choice, because for the first time in 10,000 years, they faced an enemy they could not defeat. News of the treaty spread across the galaxy like wildfire, and delegations from dozens of species began arriving at Earth seeking alliance or simply understanding. They all wanted to know the same thing. How had such a young civilization built such power, and how had they kept it hidden for so long? Admiral Helena Vance answered these questions in her final public address before retiring from military service. She stood before a crowd of millions in the plaza of New Geneva, with cameras broadcasting her words to every human colony and every alien world that cared to listen. We built our hidden fleet because we understood something that older civilizations had forgotten, she said, her voice carrying across the silent crowd. And that truth is simple. Peace is precious, but it must be defended by those willing to fight for it. She paused and looked out at the faces of the people she had sworn to protect. For 80 years, our best scientists and engineers worked in secret to create weapons that could defeat any enemy. They did this not because we wanted war, but because we knew that someday war might come whether we wanted it or not. We gave the Verith every chance to turn back, she continued. And we warned them. We pleaded with them. We made our position absolutely clear. But they did not listen, and so we showed them the consequences of ignoring our warning. Her voice grew softer, and something like sorrow crossed her weathered face. I take no pride in what we did. War is terrible, and the deaths we caused will haunt me for the rest of my days. But I would do it again without hesitation, because the alternative was the enslavement of our entire species. She raised her hand in salute to the crowd. Remember this lesson, my fellow humans. Hope for peace, prepare for war, and never let anyone tell you that your survival is not worth fighting for. Captain Yuki Tanaka, now promoted to Admiral, took command of Earth's expanded defense fleet. Her first act was to visit the site of the battle, where human ships had erected a memorial to those who had fallen in the fighting. The memorial was a simple structure of white stone floating in the darkness of space, engraved with the names of every human who had died in the battle, and illuminated by lights that would burn for 1,000 years. At its base was inscribed a message for any who might pass by. They were warned. We take no pride in what followed. Admiral Tanaka stood before the memorial for a long time, remembering the faces of pilots and crew members who had not survived to see humanity's victory. We will protect what you died for, she whispered to the stars, and we will make sure your sacrifice was not in vain. On a distant world far from human space, a young alien child looked up at her parent with curiosity in her large eyes. What are humans? She asked, having heard the words spoken with strange reverence by the adults around her. Her parent knelt down and took her small hands in theirs. Humans are a young species from a small world called Earth, they explained, and they are not the strongest or the oldest or the most numerous people in the galaxy. Then why does everyone talk about them? The child asked with innocent confusion. The parent looked up at the stars and spoke with quiet respect. Because when the mighty Verith Dominion tried to conquer them, the humans did something no one expected. They stood their ground, and they fought back, and they won. They are small, the parent continued, and they are young, and they do not wish to fight. But when you push them, when you threaten what they love, they become something else entirely. What do they become? The child whispered. The parent smiled and squeezed her hands gently. They become the consequences, little one. They become the warning that should never have been ignored. The child looked up at the stars with new wonder in her eyes, imagining a distant world where a young species had drawn a line in the sand and dared the universe to cross it. And somewhere in the darkness between the stars, the memorial still burned with its eternal lights, reminding all who passed that humanity had sent one last warning. And when that warning was ignored, they had delivered consequences that the galaxy would never forget.